Hey, episode 5 of my digital salute to greatest writer of the modern times, in my opinion, Neal Stephenson. This should be the last one. As you can see, the pile of books is getting smaller and smaller, and we're getting closer and closer to the release of his latest book. So we're just going to run through the last 3 books here. I think that after the Baroque cycle, and it's no surprise, but I think Neal Stephenson was probably completely burnt out. You know, that can be totally forgiven. It's just such an unbelievable achievement what he pulled off with the Baroque cycle. It really is. It really stands as a high point, in my opinion, to modern achievements in any field, and it's really worth, I think, everybody having an encounter with it. Well, after that, I think he sort of started to decide to really kind of push himself into other realms with varied results, in my opinion. And I'm going to try and be as charitable as possible, and not as not as what can I say, not as sort of, I don't know what the word is, sort of hypercritical as possible. But after this achievement of the Baroque cycle, it's very hard not to get used to that. It's like, well, how can you top that or anything like that? Well, in my opinion, he should have been locked in a room by some totalitarian dictator and been forced to write about every historical era, not just the Enlightenment era, but every historical era, until he was done with a world history, because it was absolutely blistering work. That's not what happened. He ended up trying lots and lots of different genres after this, and let's go through them. The next book after that was one called Anathem. Now, I've tried to describe in the previous episodes things I love about Neal Stephenson, and one of the things I love is his massive ensemble casts, having multiple characters who all interact. This one does have a multiple ensemble cast, but they're not given the luxury of the narrator's attention, if that makes any sense. It's written in the third person, but still, is it written in the third person? No, it's written in the first person. That's the big crime of this. He tries to write in the first person again, so I like it a lot less. Having said that, first time I read it, I wasn't into it at all, but the second time and the third time I read it, I really got it, and it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a 9 out of 10, whereas these books are sort of 10, 11, 12 out of 10. This is a 9 out of 10. It's a fantastic book. It basically revolves around some kind of alternate Earth, where instead of, let's say, instead of the religions as we might recognize them, the main religion that exists, the main reason why people build a monastery and go and live in a monastery is to study maths. And you know, that's fantastic. It's a really great way to analyze maths and its effects on our culture through the lens of an alternate Earth, which is slightly different from ours. It's fun. It's pretty fun. So read it. It's a 9 out of 10. It's great, but read the other ones first. Okay, I'm going to put that one back on the shelf. Then after that, he turned his attention to writing a sort of contemporary techno-thriller. It's called Reamed. Great little joke there, Reamed. And this one's a lot of fun. Again, it revolves around broadly gaming is one aspect of it. Gaming, the interconnected world, sort of blackmail, hacking, trolls, terrorism. There's some good stuff in here about sort of Al-Qaeda type terrorists. Neal Stephenson is at his best when he's not woke. We'll get into that in a minute. But fundamentally, Neal Stephenson isn't woke, and he throws in some stuff here, some genuinely menacing, great stuff about Al-Qaeda. It's great. Again, I much preferred it on the second time I read it. I've read it twice. So give this one a chance. It's really good. But it's probably, yeah, like a, if Anathem is a 9 out of 10, well, this is a 9 out of 10 too. This is pretty good. And what I'm going to do is do a little bit of reading. Just wet my whistle a little bit. Now, the part that I'm going to read is something which I think is when this book is at its best. It's talking about gaming and how gaming interfaces with reality. So you've got the main character, his name is Richard, and he owns a gaming company, and they've designed a game that's basically World of Warcraft, but in the same way that Death Clock from Metalocalypse are like 1,000 times bigger than the Beatles, this is World of Warcraft that's 1,000 times bigger than World of Warcraft. And it's changed the world, this game. The game is called Terrain. And so this is when the book's at its best. It's when it's talking about gaming and Neal Stephenson's take on that. So it's fun. Let's read a little passage and then I'll give you my thoughts. And when I say little passage, I'm going to read quite a big passage. Okay. Where can we start? World of Warcraft had been the toweringly dominant competitor in Corporation 9592's industry, that's the name of his company, Corporation 9592's industry, for what seemed like forever, until you checked the dates and realized that it was only a few years old. Richard and Nolan had passed through several phases in their attitude towards it. 1. Abashed denial that they could ever even dream of competing with such an entrenched power as WoW, World of Warcraft. Certainty growing into cockiness that they could knock it off its perch in a coup de main. Number 3. Crushing realization that it was impossible and that they were doomed to abject failure. Number 4. Cautious optimism that maybe life wasn't going to totally suck forever. Number 5. Finally getting their shit together and coming up with a plan. Somewhere between phases 4 and 5, Richard holed up at the Schloss. That's his kind of like a mountain retreat. He's pretty wealthy already. At the Schloss during Mud Month, the weeks following the end of the ski season, and wrote out some ideas that had been brewing in his mind since the deepest and most lugubrious weeks of Phase 3. Reading them, Corvallis had identified this as an inflection point, which was another of those terms that meant nothing to Richard, but that was, to judge from the vigorous shifts in body language it elicited in meetings, of infinite significance to maths geeks. As far as Richard could make out, it denoted the hardly obvious at the time moment when, seen later in retrospect, everything had changed. For a while, the memo had rattled around the office like a dried-out whiteboard pen. Then Richard, with a bit of jargonic assistance from Corvallis, had given it an arresting title: Medieval Armed Combat as Universal Metaphor and All-Purpose Protocol Interface Schema, Macumapis. Since medieval armed combat was the oxygen they breathed, and even mentioning it seemed gratuitous, so this got shortened to Umapis, and then, since the metaphor thing made some of the business people itchy, became Apis, which they liked enough to trademark. And since Apis was one letter away from Apis with one P, which was the Latin for bee, then they went on to create and trademark some bee and hive related logo art. As Corvallis patiently told Richard, it was all a kind of high-tech in-joke. In that world, API stood for Application Programming Interface, which meant the software control panels that tech geeks slapped onto their technologies in order to make it possible for other tech geeks to write programs that made use of them, all of which was 1 or 2 layers of abstraction beyond the point where Richard could give a shit. All I'm trying to say with this memo, he told Corvallis, is that anyone who feels like it ought to be able to grab hold of our game by the technological short hairs and make it solve problems for them. And Corvallis assured him that this was precisely synonymous with having an API and everything else was just marketing. The problems Richard had in mind were not game or even entertainment related ones. Corporation 9592 had already covered as many of those bases as their most imaginative people could think of. And then they had paid lawyers to pore over the stuff that they'd thought of and extrapolate whole abstract categories of things that might be thought of later. And wherever they went, they found that the competition had been there 5 years earlier and patented everything that was patentable and in one sense or another pissed on everything that wasn't, which explained a lot about Phase 3. The Epiphany, if this wasn't too fine a word for some crazy-ass shit that popped up in Richard's brain, had occurred in a brew pub at SeaTac. Richard had been marooned there for a couple of hours after his flight to Spokane and had been delayed by a collision between a baggage truck and the plane. A strangely common occurrence at that airport, and one of those folksy touches that help to preserve its small-town feel. Sitting there quaffing his pint and gazing at the shoeless and beltless travellers penguins shuffling through the metal detectors, he had been struck by the sheer boringness of the work being performed by the screeners of the Transportation Security Administration, TSA. Staring at those bags moving through the X-ray machines, trying to remain alert for that once every 10 years moment when someone would actually try to send a gun through. Thus far, a commonplace observation. Thus far, a commonplace observation. He had done a bit of research on it later on and discovered that the more sophisticated airports had hired psychologists to tackle the problem and devised some clever tricks. For example, they would digitally insert fake images of guns into the video feed from an X-ray machine, frequently enough that the screeners would see false color silhouettes of revolvers and semi-automatics and IEDs glide across their visual fields several times a day instead of once every 10 years. That, according to research, was enough to prevent their pattern recognition neurons from being reclaimed and repurposed by brain processes that were more fruitful, or at least more entertaining. The brain, as far as Richard could determine from haphazard skimming of whatever came up on Google, was sort of like the electrical system of Mogadishu. A whole lot was going on in Mogadishu that required copper wire for conveyance of power and information, but there was only so much copper to go around, and so what wasn't being actively used tended to get pulled down by militias and taken crosstown to beef up some power-hungry warlords' private improvised power network. As with copper in Mogadishu, so with neurons in the brain. The brains of people who did unbelievably boring shit for a living showed dark patches in the zones responsible for job-related processes, since all those almost never exercised neurons got pulled down and trucked somewhere else and used up to beef up the circuits used to keep track of NCAA tournament brackets and celebrity makeovers. So the airport luggage scanner Epiphany was simultaneously dis and encouraging. Dis because some occupational psychologists had already beaten him to it and come up with a fix, but encouraging because people with PhDs had vouched for the same idea. Had vouched for the basic idea. In order to make the case for Macumapis, Richard had to A. Find some other desperately boring job to use as his experimentum crucis, and B. Figure out a way to map its basic processes onto medieval armed combat. Between his years as a slavering World of Warcraft addict and his years as founder and creator of T-Rain, he had ripped out probably half of the neurons in his brain and dragged them over and soldered them onto the cortical centers responsible for two-handed axe-wielding, shield-bashing, arrow-shooting, and spellcasting. In an evening of random questing around the imaginary world that D-Square and Skeletor, that's his colleagues, had created, Richard could fire more neurons than Einstein had used while coming up with the idea of general relativity. Certainly way more neurons than the average supermarket checkout clerk or private security guard fired during an 8-hour shift. And the power of the internet ought to make all of that neural activity re-switchable. You should be able to patch it all together so that it would work. Around this time, there was an airport security scare in which some fuckwit entered a concourse by walking upstream through an exit portal, bypassing the security checkpoint. As always happened in such cases, the entire airport had to be shut down. Planes waiting for takeoff had to taxi back to gates and unload all passengers and baggage. All the passengers had to be ejected from the sterile side of the airport, then turn around and pass through security again. Flights were delayed, and the delays ramified through the global air travel system, eventually racking up a cost of tens of millions of dollars. All of which could have been prevented had the one TSA employee posted by the exit, an employee whose sole purpose in being there was to just keep his fucking eyes open and stop people from walking the wrong way through a door, had actually done his job. Richard was fascinating. How could even the laziest and sloppiest employee screw this up? The answer, apparently, was that it had nothing to do with laziness or sloppiness. It was that Mogadishu copper thing all over again. The neural pathways required to accomplish this seemingly easy task of identifying a pedestrian walking the wrong way through a door had, in the brain of this employee, been uprooted a long time ago and zip-tied onto those used by some other, more important or at least more frequently used procedure. And so they started up the first Apis pilot project, which went something like this. They shot some consumer-grade video of Corporation 9592 employees walking down a hallway. They spun that up into a demo, they showed to several regional airports that were too small and poorly funded to afford fancy, expensive, alarm-equipped one-way doors, and thus had to rely on the bored employee sitting in a chair by the door technology. They parlayed those meetings into a deal that gave them access to live 24/7 security camera footage from a couple of those airports. The footage, of course, just showed people walking through the exit. They patched that footage into pattern recognition software that identified the shapes of the individual humans and translated them into vector data in 3D space. This made it possible to import all the data into the T-Rain game engine. The same positions and movements were conferred on avatars from the T-Rain world. The stream of human passengers walking down the corridor in their blazers, their high heels, their Chicago Bear sweatpants became a K-stream of Kashitrii, Dwin, trolls, and other fantasy characters. Dressed in chainmail, plate armor, and wizard's robes, moving down a stone-lined passageway at the exit of the mighty citadel of Gazantem. The High Marshal of the Gazantian Empire then made an announcement to the effect that huge amounts of gold could be earned by, honor bestowed upon, and valuable weapons and armor handed out to anyone who nabbed a goblin attempting to sneak in through said passageway. Characters who volunteered for this duty were issued a special instrument, the Horn of Vigilance, and told to blow it whenever they spotted a wrong-way goblin. Extra points were handed out for actually confronting the goblin and, of course, engaging it in medieval armed combat. Now, in all the entire real-world airports put together, the number of people who got onto concourses by walking the wrong way through exit doors amounted to maybe 1 or 2 per year. Not enough to hold the attention or assure the vigilance of even the most rabid T-Rain player. So the Apis system now sweetened the pot by automatically generating fictitious virtual wrong-way goblins and sending them up that tunnel at the rate of 1 every couple of minutes, every day, forever. Some balancing had to happen. The value of the rewards had to be tweaked relative to the frequency of wrong-way goblins, but with a minimal amount of adjustment, they were able to set the system up in such a way that 100% of the wrong-way goblins were apprehended. The total number of wrong-way goblins that had to be generated per year was about 200,000, which was no problem, since generating them was free. The trick, of course, was that a tiny minority of those one-way goblins were not, in fact, computer-generated figments. They were representations of actual human forms that had been picked up by airport security cameras as they walked the wrong way into airport concourses. In reality, of course, this happened so rarely that testing the system was well nigh impossible. So they ran drills several times a day in which uniformed, badged TSA employees would present themselves at the exit and show credentials to the board guard and then walk upstream into the concourse. In exactly 100% of all such cases, some T-Rain player somewhere in the world, almost always a gold farmer in China, would instantly raise the Horn of Vigilance to his virtual lips and blow a mighty blast and rush out to confront the corresponding one-way goblin, an event that, through some artful cross-wiring between Corporation 9592 servers and the airport security systems, would cause red lights to flash and horns to sound and doors to automatically lock at the airport in question. Corvallis and most of the other techies hated this idea because of its sheer bogosity, the bogusness, which was screamingly obvious to any person of technical acumen who thought about it for more than a few seconds. If their pattern recognition software could identify the moving travelers and vectorize their body positions well enough to translate their movements into T-Rain, then it could just as easily notice automatically with no human intervention when one of those figures was walking the wrong way and sound the alarm. There was no need at all to have human players in the loop. They should just spin out the pattern recognition part of it as a separate business. Richard understood and acknowledged all of this and did not care. Did you or did you not tell me that this was all marketing? What part of your own statement did you not understand? The purpose of the exercise was not really to build a rational, efficient airport security system. It was, rather, to use yet another of those portentous phrases cribbed from the maths world, an existence proof. Once it was up and running, they could point to it and to its 100% success rate as vindicating the premise of Apis, which was that real-world problems, especially problems that were difficult to solve because of hardwired deficiencies of the human neurological system, such as the tendency to become bored when given a terrible job, could be tackled by metaphrasing them into medieval armed combat scenarios. And then here brandishing two searingly hip terms from high tech, putting them out on the cloud so that they could be crowdsourced. Okay, I'll leave it there. I hope you enjoyed that section, and it's long, but I hope you enjoyed a little bit of that fun concept that hasn't eventuated, as far as I know, in the world, where gaming has been used to carry out tasks, but it's actually kind of a phenomenal idea. And the reason I wanted to read that section to you is because lately it's made me think of something. In this whole pandemic of disease of unspecified origin and unspecified name, it seems like one of the sticking points in the whole system is the regrettable the regrettable need for ventilators. And while the technology for ventilators seems to be in short supply, I believe that they could be manufactured in large quantities if the will was there. I believe that could happen. But the real sticking point of the ventilator system isn't the ventilator technology, it's the staff. It's the staffing of those ventilators. They need to be manned or womaned or nursed or doctored 24/7. And it's a very, very precise activity that's very, very work and mentally intensive. So I was thinking about this the other day. This book came out when? Christ, let me think. Stupid, but I can't remember when it came out. It came out sometime in around 2010, maybe. Not sure. Don't have an easy answer for that. Anyway, and suddenly I thought the other day when I was imagining a massive expansion of ventilator technology, if this this pandemic of unspecified name is with us for a long time, and there are going to be massive requirements for ventilators ongoing, then why not massively increase the quantity of ventilators and outsource the surveillance of them to gaming? So you'd have a certain amount of staff on the unit, but instead of them keeping an eye on now they can probably keep an eye on one ventilator. I think it's that intensive, but let's say they can keep an eye on 2 or 3 each, and person them. Why not have hundreds of ventilators in facilities and hundreds of facilities across the world, but the monitoring is carried out, is digitized through a game, and carried out by gamers who don't actually have any idea what it is they're looking at, but it still the signals from the game are converted in a way similar to described in this book, and gamers keep an eye on it for us, and they raise the alarm, they raise the horn of vigilance when there's an issue that needs attention from a human, and that way hopefully that could alleviate some of the issues with that system. I'm probably way off base there, but it just is what crossed my mind when I was remembering this and thinking about the issues with that part of our current conundrum. Okay, well, we'll go through the last little books, and you can see that I've been filling up my shelf of... I won't do it because it's too far of a stretch, but this is my shelf where I keep my Neal Stephenson books, pride of place, because I love them so much. Next was a book called Seveneves. I won't talk about this one too much. I give this one a 7 out of 10 on my Stephenson scale. It's really fun. It's really, really good. The first part in particular is excellent. But I feel like at a certain point, Neal Stephenson was a little bit bored, and he decided that some of the media that we've enjoyed in the past in the sci-fi realm, he might try some of the outlandish media that we've enjoyed. He might try to work out how, in a hard sci-fi manner, we might get there. And he's just kind of displaying his prowess. So in this one, I'm not going to give away any of the plot, but that's fundamentally what he's trying to do. He's trying to take a sci-fi premise of that we've regularly enjoyed in various particularly TV shows, and then he's saying, well, how might we actually get there? It's fun. I've enjoyed it. I've read it a couple of times. It's great, but it's a 7 out of 10 in the Neal Stephenson rating scale. It's perfectly good. A warning then. I don't even own this one in hardback. The next, I'm not going to show it on screen even. The next one that he did was a book called Fall. It came out, I think, a couple of years ago. It's a sort of loose sequel to Reamed, and regrettably, it also tries to draw in characters from the Baroque cycle and Cryptonomicon. Now, I'm going to sound very, very harsh here. I'm going to give Fall a 0 out of 10. I think it was a massive, colossal misstep. I don't like it at all. I've only read it once. I'll probably leave it at that. I might come back to it and, like I did with this one, read it a second time and really love it and really get it. But at the moment as it stands, I've only read it once and I hated it. I really, really hated it. And that could have been the end of the Neal Stephenson journey for me, where I just thought, oh, he's lost his way, completely lost his way. His trajectory is downhill. So we go from a 9 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10 to a 0 out of 10. He's done. However, that isn't the end of the story, because, as I said, his new book is coming in hard copy pretty soon, and it's called Termination Shock. Now, I happen to be the owner of a Kindle. On Kindle, it was released about a week ago, or when you're seeing this video, 2 weeks ago. And I've started reading it. I got it on the first day it came out on Kindle and started reading it straight away. I don't have a lot of reading time, in spite of what making these videos might suggest. But I am thoroughly enjoying it. I think it's a major return to form. It's fantastically written. It's on the topic of the environmental movement, and it's contemporary as hell. It's well up to date. But unlike Fall, which had really, really regrettable dalliances with wokeness in a way that I thought that Neal Stephenson wasn't being critical of. He was reproducing uncritically, and it really ruined the reading experience for me. It seems like he's retreated from that. This is unwoke, but not in an aggressive way, just realistic, not living in a bloody fantasy land, which is what wokeness is, in my opinion. It's just reality, which is what Neal Stephenson is so good at reproducing in an exciting way. So far, so good. This Termination Shock is a really, really good book. I can recommend it. I'm not going to give it a rating yet, because I haven't finished it. But I can say that I'm really enjoying it, and I'm really, really happy to be back in Neal Stephenson land. It bodes very well for the rest of his career, and I hope he keeps writing books forever. And so that brings us to the end of my digital salute to Neal Stephenson. I hope you enjoyed it. If you managed to stick around through this insanity, I salute you too. Thanks for listening to all these episodes. And all that remains to be said is, do you like Neal Stephenson too? If you like Neal Stephenson, or if you're a more broad reader than I am, because I'm basically obsessed, who else should I check out in the sci-fi realm or in the historical fiction realm who's anything like as good as Neal Stephenson, or better in your opinion? I'd be delighted to read your suggestions. Thanks so much for watching the content on this channel. It really means a lot to me, and I will make a return to creativity. As I said, I can see a light at the end of the tunnel with my insane busyness, and so I will be able to put time in a different way. When I record something like this, I just throw on the camera and talk, and then upload it. It's very, very time efficient, almost one-to-one, let's say. Whereas producing music or producing videos, even worse, the time investment to time output is it's a tough one to be able to manage when I've also got studies and family and other duties, work backing up as well. So that's been the equation. But like I say, light at the end of the tunnel, and more news in that regard soon. I'm wishing you all the very best. I hope you're holding up well in this crazy time. And I hope you can see light at the end of whatever tunnel, and it's not a freight train coming your way, as Metallica famously said. So I'm wishing you the best, and overall, I'm wishing everybody in the whole world, peace. So take care. Bye-bye. find the stop button, can I? Cheerio.